Very excited to hear this topic, which I think is extremely important, especially as people develop and grow. So it's on professional development. So Tim, why don't you give us an overview of the discussion that we had today?
As we enter June, it's Leadership and Management Month with GSD Talks. And we have Andy Scantland, who is an executive coach who I've worked with in the past. And he's just a really great thinker about how we can look at leadership and management while resolving our internal issues that kind of cause us to become sensitive or defensive and things that are generally counterproductive to actually leading and managing.
Yeah, and he's going to touch on a few things, for instance, messaging. So how to message either up or sideways or down in leadership to your peers, but also your reports. And simple tactics, really, that just go along with how you're going to communicate change, obviously in the present day that we're living in, where it's all change, but also how to grow and be strategic around your career path, and whether that's management level and or if we're coming into the industry at an entry level.
Yeah, sounds like an important topic no matter where you're at actually in your career. So I look forward to hearing it myself.
Thanks for coming on today. We wanted to talk with you about coaching for performance and providing and receiving feedback. And so I was wondering if you could just introduce yourself quickly for the audience.
Certainly. My name is Andy Scantland. I'm an executive strengths coach, and I help leaders just become more authentic and effective in their leadership.
So as we were kind of talking about having you on, one of the conversations that you and I were having was specifically in the security industry. I know you're not in the security industry. You're in the business side of coaching. But a lot of leaders and managers and newcomers, we all come from military, government, law enforcement, and with that comes challenges in understanding the role of a leader. And I was wondering if you could kind of talk about that from the business perspective.
Sure. Yeah, I see one of the major roles of leadership is to set their team up for success. And when you bring up points around, some people in this industry come up through the military or the government world versus others come up through other spaces. What I think about is kind of a continuum between being very directive in your leadership and being very participative in your leadership. And what I think is really helpful is when a leader can pull the right tool out in the moment to serve his or her person in giving that person what they need. That might be, if the building is on fire, it means giving very directive leadership. Hey, go out through this exit at this time. Other times where you're trying to build someone's confidence up, when you're trying to help them learn how to solve problems, now you show up more as a coach and you ask questions and you encourage them to think about options and alternatives for how they might show up. So when I think about leadership, I think about giving people what they need in the moment to be able to get to the goal that you're seeking.
That's kind of an interesting way to think about it, right? Because coming from the military and government, your goals that you seek are kind of handed to you. Whereas in the private sector, in the business world, we have to kind of come up with them. The development, the career path development in the security industry is not very defined. And so we really do need to help the people under us understand what success looks like and what the expectations are of them. I was wondering if Brittany, if you had any thoughts or experiences on that.
Yeah, I think that, especially in the security industry, there's such a wide variety of levels, right? So for instance, COVID-19 or coronavirus has thrown a wrench into the entire industry as a whole and really made us all look at and understand that there's, really boots on the ground here that are frontline workers. And I think that was kind of a big wake-up call, is because we forgot how many of our industry are actually frontline workers, right? And then there's like this operations, there's the operations meat of the industry, and then there's the service provider meat of the industry, and then there's the executive level. And it's really as far as going back to, using your listening skills, I think is the biggest piece of management that they can do. I think on the other side of the fence is being able to articulate what you're wanting out of a position or a job or a relationship with your teammates or whatever it is. I think that's really important. to actually be able to articulate it on one side, but also then understand what the expectations are from your management. And then from the management side, I think it's really important to understand, are they getting it, right? Because we can say it, we can give it to them in bullets, and maybe they're a visual learner and they're just not paying attention, or they're just not grasping what their actual expectations are. I've run into that in the past before myself, because evidently it wasn't in the format in which somebody could learn well and remember, right? So the expectation was off and the deliverable was off and everything else. So I think it's very, very important as a management or executive level to be a listener, and the power of that is insurmountable. And I think that's, one big takeaway I've learned, at least in the last, years of being in management.
You really hit on something there that Andy and I have talked a lot about. So coming from that law enforcement government background, the higher up you go, the more important you are, and you don't tend to take feedback, you give orders. And the lower you are, the less important you are, and you don't ask questions. Yes. And so Andy, like how does a leader in the security industry, or even, a lower level first responder worker who are now super important and very essential, how do they consolidate those roles and new expectations in their head and show up as themselves?
I think it's an important question, and I think, Tim, in our work together, I think you've been a great example of this, which is understand where the person is and know what they need in that moment. And what I mean by that is think about just an XY axis, where on the horizontal, the X axis, you've got competence. What are the skill sets that somebody needs? And on the Y axis, think about awareness, or think about confidence. And by figuring out where the person lies within that matrix, you can identify what they need in that moment. And oftentimes, as people grow, you'll find they move beyond the need for skill building and more in the need to grow their awareness of what's needed next. And when they start, and you'll start seeing signs of it when they start bringing you solutions and ideas and stop bringing you questions and check-ins.
So what happens when your people, as a new leader transitioning in, when your people stop bringing you questions and start bringing you solutions, and that makes you feel insecure about your role, right? Because this is not how it's supposed to be.
Yeah, I'd really welcome.
I've been there.
Yeah, I'd really welcome Brittany's input here, because she's built an organization. But the fact is, the further up we move in an organization's hierarchy, the less knowledge we're going to have around how to get things done. The day-to-day wrenches and pliers that actually accomplish things. What we have to do is build the team that allows that to happen, by building the skill sets and the resources that allows people to get their job done. And our job is to do a couple things. One is to create a really vivid, colorful picture and detailed picture of what we're trying to accomplish. In other words, give people the North Star. And the second thing is give people the confidence they need to be able to move forward. Brittany, what's your thought on that?
No, that's a good point. And it's a tough problem, right? Because you have this set generally of overachievers that really overachieve, right? And they may overachieve others out of jobs, to be quite honest. So it's a really interesting concept that you brought up there. But I think that if you channel them properly, generally what they're after is the next step. They're either bored, they're likely bored in their position, or they know that they're going to get bored soon, right? We know that the lifeline trajectory in any company nowadays is 3 years, not 30, right? So in 3 years, they're thinking, I'm going to max out in this position. I'm either going to move up or I'm going to move altogether. And I think that knowing that, and that's even for, like I said, our boots on the ground workforce, they switch jobs almost faster than some of us, But what's interesting is I think if the biggest thing you can do for them is channel them into a direction that is their actual passion and understanding what that is. So for instance, if they're really, really good at the marketing piece, great. Set up a trajectory. Let them go down their own path, right? But make sure that it's very detailed, it's very specific, there's very clear goals, it's very understood that you're not going to hit these markers until this and that and the other. But there is that set of overachievers that, yeah, they may threaten your job, but it's also up to you as a leader to understand how to give them the kudos that they deserve for the ideas that they bring you, and put yourself in a position. And I had some good advice back in the day that said, build an army above you as well as below you. So underneath you, you might have, your employees, whoever your direct reports are, or whatever, but it's just as important to build that above you. Well, generally what happens is if you're an executive or management level and you're switching companies, these work teams go with you. So it's understanding their core set of skills, and then, like I said, bringing them along with you actually is what you want. You want those, top performers to be loyal to you in any sense.
That was actually really insightful. And it brings me back to that, prior military service, prior gov. Everybody has the ranks they have to move up through sequentially. It's not very often that ranks are skipped. And for different leadership and management positions, there are a small number of slots. So if you're in that slot and you're getting good reviews, you're fine. And what you're saying in the private sector, where the development path is not well defined, where there's not technically a safe slot for you as long as you're getting good reviews, and you're telling people that they have to develop people to come up after them. And some people might feel like that puts their job at risk. In fact, not too long ago, I was in a meeting to where we were asked, hey, so you're gone tomorrow. Who's in your slot, and what do they need to get there? And for a lot of people, they were like, well, I'm in my slot, and I don't think anybody else can do my job, right?
Right.
and they were like, that's great, and you are, but here's the thing, right? This is what business continuity is about. We're in a Fortune company. We're not in just a security guard service company to where you can stay as long as you want. People are going to get opportunities, things are going to change. The company has to continue to do what's best for the company. Like, how do you grow people into these roles? And I think that's a great transition from, how do we coach? How do we understand our role as a leader? And Andy, how do we coach people in this manner while keeping our own emotions under control?
That's great. That's a great example. And what I'm hearing, Tim, is how do we feel secure ourselves while we're growing a team to take our jobs away from us, right? One definition of leadership is making yourself obsolete while the work gets done, right? But that's a scary proposition. The key is that you're growing your people. They're taking on additional skill sets. They're taking on additional capacity. They're able to deliver at a higher level, but you are as well. There's no reason that your career needs to stop just because you're leading a team now. What can you learn? What additional responsibility can you take on? What additional contribution can you make to the organization beyond your current job description, beyond your current team? And that's what makes you valuable, when you show up in a really useful way, a way that shows that you can deliver beyond just that narrow guardrail in which you're operating. That's when you begin to be recognized within your own organization. And that's when people start to recognize you and start to want to pull you into new opportunities.
Really good point, because I'm going to add to that, because I had this situation happen to me in the past where I was kind of stagnant, and I didn't really know what to do, but I realized that it was almost my own fault, because I had climbed to the top of that skill level, and there just wasn't any position that went above that. That was it, right? For no one's fault. It was just, that's what it was. And what I ended up doing, which worked out well, and I'll say even on accident, was I ended up starting to get my peers around me to know what I'm doing, know what my job entailed, and understand how important it was to make the whole department continue. And with that, I started asking, and I started consolidating, and I started taking things off my manager's plate. And I said, hey, how do I make my leadership's job easier? Innately, just thinking in the back of my head, how do I make their job easier? And that grew me into a position that they ended up creating specifically because they didn't even know they needed it. But they said, oh, you can do this stuff? Oh, here's more responsibility. Absolutely. But it took me a first step to even sit down and think to myself, what more responsibility can I even take on? How can I make my boss look better? How can I make my leadership look better? How can I run this more efficiently? Here's an idea, right? And I think that is a concept that sometimes we get so busy with operating that we forget to even do that reflection, right? My question for you, Andy, is out of that is how do you deliver those messages to your leadership without looking like you are taking their job? How do you message this specifically? So you're not taking their job, you want to be helpful, you want to take on more responsibility, yet it's a fine line of, I'm not looking to go anywhere, I'm just looking to provide more value and eventually increase my role inside this organization. How do you message that to leadership? I think that's key.
Well, I think you've already nailed a couple of things around it. When we think about how am I served in this situation, in other words, how am I going to get promotion? How am I going to get more money, more responsibility? That's when people throw up the guardrails. They throw up the scary, pushback against you, right? But when we talk about what's the mission of the organization and how can I show up in a way that gets us closer to that as a leader, now people can start to collaborate with you instead of starting to fight you, right? And if we use the mission of the organization as our boss, as our North Star, then that just changes the questions around. It's not around how can I take my boss's job, it's how can we all do this in a bigger way.
Exactly.
So I've known Brittany long enough that she's a big advocate of managing up, right? You have to look to help your manager for the betterment of the business, but you also have to take some control over your career. And so Andy, as you're managing up or even kind of coaching up is kind of, what we're talking about here. How do you frame that in a way that if you have an insecure manager or maybe they're not insecure about you, but hey, from time to time, we all become insecure in our role, right? Whether it's you go through a season, you're just like, I don't feel like I'm being super productive. And we have that tendency to get defensive. So how do you coach up to kind of prepare the way for this feedback to be heard by your manager?
Well, I've got a little framework that'll probably sound familiar to you. If we think about what needs everybody has in the world, just as human beings, we can kind of boil them down to four things. One is, do I feel like I'm important and I have impact in the world? So importance. Two, do I have predictability and surety in the world? Do I know what's coming down the pipe, and do I have a plan for it? Do I have a sense of growth? Is my world expanding, or is it shrinking, or is it stagnant? Do I have a sense of growth in my world? And fourth, do I have connection to the group? Do I feel like I'm part of the group? Do I feel love for the group? Do I feel I have a role in the group? One of the ways you can manage up is to identify what need your leader is expressing in any given situation. If it's a situation in which things are tense, stressful, then what's the need that's likely to show up? It's going to be certainty. And what can you do as a human being, as a leader, to increase your boss's level of certainty? If the person feels like they're stagnating, how can you demonstrate that they have the area to grow? What can they take on as leaders? What can they take on for learning that will allow them to enhance their careers? Make sure that they feel a part of the group, that they're not separated or segregated from the group, that they feel like they have a role. Call out what role and value that they've really delivered for the group, and how they can support you in serving your team. And by identifying the need that's showing up in the moment, it's not to be manipulative. It's not to pull people in the direction they want to go. It's meeting their needs so you can have a really positive interaction and figure out how you can work together more cohesively. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of planning out your communication strategy to be the most effective communicator you can on any given day. And I think I heard you say something that I think will be foreign to a lot of people in security, but that we should be thankful and gracious with one another, and we should do that up. So you should let your manager know, like, hey, the other day, that was amazing. And it helped me in these ways. It helped me feel more secure about my role and my standing with you. Am I hearing that right?
I think you are, yeah. We want to reinforce the behavior that serves us, right? So if our boss shows up in a meeting and is really supportive or really gives some good guidance, we want to call that out. In that way, the person's going to be encouraged to do it again. On the other hand, we also need to be able to tell our truth to our leader. So that's probably done one-on-one rather than a group. But for the most part, I think people are really thankful for the guidance and the feedback that they get, as long as it's delivered in service to them, not in a way that serves just particularly our self-centered nature, but serves the group, serves the mission, and serves that human being across the table from us. I think nobody's immune from that. Brittany, your experience with this?
No, spot on. And to ask you another question is, when you have this situation, and I'll give myself as an example, and you can tell me best use case for this or best tactic to avoid this, is I've had a very, very militaristic leader in the past, my direct superior, and tried all the soft skills, tried all the EQ that I could come up with, read books, watched everything I could possibly watch to figure out how to deal with this person. And I just could not get through how black and white the thinking was, right? And there was no gray area. And I just, if you're dealing with and like I said, this industry is one of those. And I'll say a lot of leaders in power now, or in positions now, I'll say are not this, but there are a lot too, right? And they're just used to this mentality of, like we said, or like Tim said, like order giving, right? Mm-hmm. How do you open up, like a clam, the EQ of a leader in that has that very black and white mindset? How do you, right. What are good tactics to use?
Well, I was just actually working with a client last week, and she's the furthest thing from a military background, but she still has that same black and white. It's either this or it's that, and it's no other things.
Right.
And for people who have a very black and white kind of approach to the world, oftentimes the need that they're expressing is one of certainty and predictability. So one approach you can take, if you want them to kind of think outside the box a little bit, is lead with the headline. Hey, Bob, let me give you a really quick update on what's happening. And I'm going to check these 3 boxes. This is happening, this is happening, this is happening, just like we planned.
Yeah.
That allows their limbic system, their actual sense of threat, to fall, because they know the boxes are checked. They know the things that they want to happen are happening.
That's great advice. That's great advice.
Right? And now they're ready to be more open and more resourceful and more imaginative around what else might be possible.
I've noticed that the gift of poor leadership is a gift that keeps on giving, kind of like the pandemic we're in. And, I've been with teams, I've been in offices that feel like there's a bunch of abused people. In fact, I spent like a decade working with victims of domestic violence and getting them out of relationships and getting them into safe spaces where they can, get their life back on track. And this fight or flight, black and white outlook on life is very common with people who have been scarred.
Very much so.
How often are we unknowingly abusing each other in the business setting, like trying to do the right thing, but we're actually creating scars?
And then what PTSD are you creating inside of that individual's rest of their life and rest of their career that then they're going to have to go and deal with, right? That you don't even know you're doing as a leader, or you might be that leader and you haven't even sat there and reflected on it.
Right. And I think a lot of it, what you're calling out there, Tim and Brittany, is so cultural. We try to fix what's broken
Right.
rather than find what's really enlightening, what's really possible.
Yeah.
And so if we can go into interactions looking for the positive, finding positive intent, and really leading with trying to understand other people's perspective, we're likely to grow ourselves and get to a place where we can collaborate and really co-create from that place. We all, as human beings, we all have a need to protect ourselves. But if we can be really intentional about finding a common ground with people and really figuring out where they're coming from, the context of that, it's just so much easier for us to move forward.
One other thought that I had, kind of in a similar vein. So this can be for leaders, this can be for newcomers to the industry who are coming from this government background, but in the military and in government, you're not encouraged to show vulnerability or weakness at all, because it is a hard environment to quote unquote survive in. But I found that in the private sector, it's essential. That if you want to create trust, that if you want to get buy-in, like you have to show vulnerability. You have to show people that you need their help. How important is this, and how do you go about doing that when you feel like you're taking a risk as well?
I think it's absolutely critical for a couple of reasons. And I work with lots of people who are on the technical or engineering or just hypercritical, getting things done kind of mode. And they approach all the problems they have analytically with their head. And they've gotten there because they've been rewarded for that. They've gotten there because it got them successful. It got them to where they are. However, it's leaving behind so much of what you're capable of. If we start to pull into more of our physical selves, more of our emotional self, it just opens up a whole new world for what might be possible. And in my perspective, it gives people a safe spot to show their whole selves to you. So now we're not only showing one dimension of ourselves, that analytical problem-solving self, we're actually showing our whole selves, and from that place, we're just a whole lot more capable.
I can just say that I've gotten some of the best feedback. I've gotten some of the best intel, and I've gotten some of the best, I'll say, peer army that I've ever had at either a happy hour or a weekly tea date that I'd set up for 15 minutes, and or just a walk around the building, right? And it's that soft skill of creating that relationship and actually putting energy into creating that relationship is actually what saves you a lot in the end. You know, that type of relationship where someone knows that they can come to you no matter what it is, saves turnover, saves people in crisis, might save your entire department.
It's true.
And you don't even know, but because you've created that a relationship that they know it's okay to come to you, even if it's the worst of the worst, it's that in itself is, I think, a blessing that a lot of people don't spend enough energy on. Probably should.
Right. The Gallup organization has studied performance and engagement for like 40 years. And the number they put on the leader for how much the leader is responsible for the engagement of the team is 70%. So 70% of the experience that the employee has and their ability to perform comes from the leader.
Yes.
And so
I can see that.
So to your point, Brittany, building relationships and having people feel safe and confident moving forward is what allows people to really expand their capacity for delivery, for what they're able to do.
Absolutely. And things like, I mean, a lot of this stuff we don't think about either because we're so wrapped up in doing our jobs for a paycheck, right? But some of the stuff, for instance, that your employee's mom just got cancer. You don't know why they haven't been necessarily present for the last 2 months until you find out that their mom just got cancer, right? Well, you as a leader at that moment have two objectives. You say, oh, I'm going to go and figure out what they're doing today and put a succession plan in place so that when they have to leave, or if they have to leave, or I have to get rid of them, I can replace them easily and get the job done. Or you can say, how do I work with this individual to A, not make his life hell, but also understand what's going on so he feels secure in his position enough to do his job well. So I don't have to lose this great employee or even lose a mediocre employee, right? Turnover is expensive. And
very expensive.
And energy and effort, and just the same as a dollar, right? But I think that, like you going back to the safety and security of just not only knowing what's going on in people's jobs, but also what's going on in people's lives. I think that's really important to be that close to, you know, not only your direct reports, but people beside you, you know, that help you support your own organization.
Tim, I know that caring is one of the kind of pillars of leadership. Yep. And I would argue that probably a decade ago, that would have been impossible to see in any large organization.
That's true, and actually managers get rated on the care that their employees feel. But, you know, back to Brittany's point, I have two interesting thoughts on that. I hope they're interesting. They're interesting to me, but not saying a lot. One, I would also ask myself, how did I not know that this person's mom had cancer for the last 2 months? Like, what is my failing as a leader that they didn't think it was good to approach me with that? And two, it really does the whole, what Brittany was talking about, you know, happy hours and just getting to know people and creating those relationships. It goes back to that old business adage that business doesn't happen in the office, it happens on the golf course. And we think like, oh, golf's a magical game, but it's about developing the relationships. It's about showing some vulnerability while you're playing sports. And it's just about getting out of that, that business headspace into a space that, you know, we're comfortable having more honest conversations.
Vulnerability was the key statement, the key word right there. The ability to give your employees or your peers the ability to be vulnerable with you is huge. And regardless of whether that's a personal problem or that's, hey, the whole globe just hit COVID-19 and our whole worlds have changed. We're all going to be really crazy for the next 3 weeks. It's okay. It's okay to be nuts through this because we're all going to be upside down, backwards. And you know what? If you need a day to figure out what to do with your kids, go take a day, right? Go figure out how to get them a babysitter.
And it's a two-way street. If you want your employees to be that comfortable with you, you need to be vulnerable with them as well. One thing that I know Andy is, he knows that I do this. When I get a new hire, so brand new, you come in, we start getting you on board, and you get a 90-day onboarding plan. And at the end of the 90 days, a presentation is due. And it's called either what are you thinking or what are you doing? And it's a roast of the program because the only times that we get a fresh perspective on what we're doing is when new people come in, whether that's above you or below you. And so it's important to get that perspective. And so I say, hey, you're going to roast the program. Like, this is supposed to be funny. Like, let us know how you feel, but let us know like all the things you're doing wrong or you don't understand, and just do it. And then they come in and they're surprised to see my director there and all of my peer managers there. And they're like, I'm like, yeah, go ahead, man. And the fact that they can roast my program in front of my boss and my peers, at first they're kind of like, I feel like I'm getting set up. But as we get into that, and they kind of own it and we all laugh and we all carry on, after that, they know they can bring any feedback to me that they want because I'll let it be aired in front of my manager.
The key message there too is that, you know, progress and growth is the objective.
And I think I think that's exactly on. And what we can go in a couple different directions, right? In our leadership, we can go toward being very secure and locking down and being very protective, or we can go more towards a growth mindset of I can get better at this, and we can do bigger things, and we can learn about what's going on. And what I hear and what you're doing, Tim, is you're using these opportunities from a fresh set of eyes to tell you how you're really being experienced. And to
Yep.
your point, until you hear that from somebody, you don't know.
Great tactic.
Absolutely.
Great tactic.
And the thing is, at some point, your boss is going to come to you and be like, hey, I just heard such and such say this. Like, what do you think about it? And it's a criticism or a gap in your program. And you can either be like, oh, I don't know why they would say such a thing, and get defensive and look like you're out of control, or just be like, oh yeah, no, that's something that we're dealing with and we're working through. And you know what? I'm glad they told you about that. Help me understand the conversation you had, because this is something we're trying to work out. And that's an unnatural thing for people in the security industry in general. I know I am the only person that's had this problem, and I think this is going to be the final question I have on coaching. But almost all the time, I don't have the answers. I generally don't know what I'm doing. Quick case in point, and I know you guys understand this. I graduated high school in 2000. I got my first computer in 2005 because I discovered it was time for me to leave the cornfield and find better employment. In 2010, I got my first smartphone and sent my first text. And in 2013, I got put in charge of executive protection technology at Facebook while trying to work my first iPhone and MacBook. So I was pretty sure I was getting fired, and I literally was the dumbest person at the table. So how do you guys manage people that have these insecurities or are in these positions, or how do you manage through when you feel like you're in that position?
You're calling out something important. The further we go up the organization, the less we're going to know, right? We're going to have a bigger picture. We're going to have a bigger vision of what's going on across the organization, but we're going to have a very, very much smaller picture of what's going on a day-to-day basis with individuals. And we have to be comfortable with that. We have to know that things are happening below us so that we can get the bigger picture stuff done. And the only way to do that is to give people the latitude, the skills, the resources they need to just excel at their work. And then build some trust into the organization so that you'll know when things are going well, and importantly, you'll know when they're not. To your point a second ago, Tim, you have to be secure enough in your shoes that you're not afraid of what anybody is saying about your organization anywhere. And the only way you do that is by making sure that people understand what their mission is, they're getting great feedback all the time, and they're working in their strengths. And when that happens, you can be comfortable in not knowing everything.
I'll do from the younger perspective of what I went through, which was similar to you, Tim, in that upbringing of, oh my gosh, now I'm launching myself into a technology role years ago in the Bay Area, was that I quite literally got told by my manager when we were going on an on-site meeting was fake it till you make it, right? We've heard that before. And
Sure.
I refuse to do that. That is like against my core values to actually fake it till I make it, right? And it only worked like 3 or 4 times, right? And until you got good at like, smiling and giggling something off that you went and researched later. But the point is that I think that, that no longer is as valid as it used to be. I think that people used to be able to do that a lot more now because there's so much technologies, there's so much analytics, there's so much, let me just pull up the dashboard and see what's going on. The whole world has changed a bit where we can't do that as much as we thought we could. Technology's changed. The ability to learn technology's changed, right? So it's one of those things that I think as a young person who's coming up in any organization or any position or any industry, is that it's up to you whether you want to learn or not. And it's up to you to decide if you want to put in the extra effort or not. That is no one's objective but your own. And it was someone that one of my very good close friends, and when I was in college, said, everything's a choice. And when you actually break down the world like that, everything really is a choice. Whether you eat dinner here, or you eat dinner there, or you choose to spend this dollar, or you choose to save that dollar, or you choose to write that email, or you choose not to write that email. Everything is actually a choice in your world. So I just try and always pick as best one as I can. It's not always right, but I get a lot of opinions before I make big decisions. And I try and learn. I am a constant learner. If I don't know it, it's immediately on my Google radar or YouTube or whatever it is. There is nothing now that we can't learn or find. And for free, most of it, right?
Absolutely.
So I think it's up to us to be a steward of our own learning capabilities now, right? University degrees are going obsolete. That's a fact. Certifications are great. Certifications are great. By the time you take the test, some of it's obsolete, right? It is up to us to be a steward of that education that we get today in life.
You know, and I'm hearing you say what you said. It's a choice if we're going to actively engage in learning at our jobs. But I'll take it a step further, and I think you would agree. It kind of comes back to having that personal integrity. It's also a choice to whether you fake it until you make it and hope nobody catches on, or say,
right,
hey, so here's the thing. I don't know what we're doing here, so help me learn because I'm going to get on top of this, but we need each other right now. And that's an uncomfortable, vulnerable position to be in. But personally, that's the avenue I take. I say, hey, this is not my element, but we're all here together. Let's figure out how to get this project done.
Yeah. Yeah, and the equivalent side is making your employees feel cohesive enough that they can ask each other questions without feeling like they're competing with each other, right? So for instance, if someone's not very good at Zoom or someone's not very good at Excel, and this person is, those are the two that should be working together. How do you get them to collaborate further? What do you as a leader need to do to get that, manage them up, right? And I think that that's also a lot of missed opportunities, even small stuff, even really small stuff, right? You can, not have to put people through $5,000 Microsoft training programs because you can just have Joe Schmo do a monthly session on everything he learned in Excel and buy him lunch.
Yep.
Right? I mean, it's the tactical piece of how we do this, I think is really key. And some, like I said, there's so many things out there, but I think the idea is to be authentic, to be real, get close, and just learn.
And that kind of goes back to what we were talking about, understanding your role as a leader, but also understanding your role in coaching, right? In the military and government, everything, all the development is disciplinary in nature. Like, oh, you're bad at this. You need to work on that. You can't move up until you're good at that. But here's the thing. Not everybody's going to be good at everything. Andy, how do you coach in through people's insecurities and helping them become good at things that are in their wheelhouse and being okay with not being good at certain things?
The fact is, I think the research is pretty clear now, and I think it serves people to know that when you step into what you're uniquely brilliant at, what makes you special and what strengths you have, and mitigate those things that you're weak at. I'm not talking about ignoring the things that you're weak at. I'm talking about mitigating them so you can spend your focus, your energy, your time on the things you're great at. That's when amazing things happen. That's when you make faster progress. That's when you make more progress. And we all have to, I think what both of you are calling out are a couple things. One is you have to be humble enough to be able to be willing to ask questions. You have to be hungry enough to be willing to ask questions. And you have to be intentional about what you're trying to create for yourself and for your organization. If you want to create a great path for yourself, to Brittany's point, show up, be ready to do what's necessary, and make intentional choices. Don't let the world happen to you.
Absolutely.
Well stated.
So I think a lot of this, very well. I think a lot of this hinges on providing meaningful feedback. So let's close with that, Andy. Based on what we've talked about, how should you go about delivering feedback to people, whether it's above you or below you?
The number one thing about it is respect people enough to tell them the truth, right? But know that in general, we are terrible raters of other people's performance. There's some research that says that up to 70% of what we say about other people's performance is really just an evaluation of ourselves. What we are great at is rating our own experience. hey, when you did that, I felt this, right? And it's not a judgment on their character. It's not a judgment on who they are as people. It's just relating how I experienced that event. And by being able to say that, we can really serve people. One really straightforward technique that I offer up to a lot of people around giving feedback. First of all, do it if you're giving positive feedback. For most people, it means doing it in front of a lot of people so that people can get the benefit of that. If you're giving constructive or negative feedback, do it one-on-one. But more than that, put it in the framework of, here's what you're doing great, and I would love to see you continue because it's really serving you and the organization. Here's what I'd love to see you start doing more of. I'd love to see more of this from you because I think it would serve you and it would serve the people around you. And finally, here are the things that I don't think are helping you. And I think you can stop those. I think you can stop those things, and that will serve you and it'll serve the team. So that's a way to give feedback that I think is less around you and worrying about hurting people's feelings. It's more around how you're experiencing the situation and what's true for you, not trying to judge what other people's motivation was or judge people's drivers or values are.
So you're starting off with being thankful. Here's what you're doing great. You're serving well. This is what we would love to see you continue for these reasons. Thank you. Here's what we could use more of. And here's what I think you don't need to continue anymore. But it's your opinion. It's not a critique, right? You're able to now have a conversation of your opinion of what's going on and how it's serving them as a person. Is that what I'm getting from this?
Yeah. And that's right. You're separating the person's behavior from the human being and what they're made of. And you're expressing what's true for you, not trying to judge who they are as human beings. And I love this perspective you're taking around being grateful for how they're showing up probably in most ways, right? In most ways, they're probably doing a great job.
Hitting on this last point, because I think it goes without saying, you said it, it also allows somebody to not feel criticized, but I'll take accountability or reflection of maybe their weaknesses in a soft way, because that's ultimately the hardest thing we can do. Self-reflection is the worst, right? But it allows them to do and take that moment to do that without it feeling like criticism.
You know, and I love that approach because as leaders, as managers, it's our job to put people in the right roles in the right seat, not their job to grow into our opinions of what they should be doing. And so keeping it kind of objective and based on where they're really doing a great job, we have the opportunity to help them manage their career in the right direction. I think we need a lot more of that in the security industry. Do you guys have any closing thoughts?
One closing thought from my end is we ought to be giving at least 3 times the amount of positive feedback as we are negative feedback. And you can stretch it out all the way up to 12 or 13 times and still have a benefit from giving that positive feedback.
Love that.
Wow.
Love it. I'm a positive reinforcement individual myself versus negative. I've always found it to be the positive reinforcement works farther and faster.
I think people get a lot more done, a lot higher quality production when they're happy and looking forward to coming to work. Right. And we as a manager, we can make that happen, and we should make that happen.
Yep.
All right. Well, Andy, thanks for coming out. We really appreciate it.
It's been
nice job,
pleasure.
Andy.
Thank you very much. Great being with you guys.